Ralsei, I am so sorry. I wasn't quite familiar with your game, but it turns out you are very familiar with this one. Well, we already knew that, honestly. It's just nice to get confirmation. Ralsei has always been the weak one. If Jevil was about to attack him, you better start praying. Lowest HP, lowest stats, but all of the knowledge in the world. Really, it never made any sense. Toby Fox games have long been proven to be ordeals where diegetic knowledge leads to greater power. The world of Deltarune has a set of rules and factors which dictate it. We are abundantly aware of these aspects, yet most of the characters within are not. This level of control and knowledge is what makes the player of Deltarune arguably the strongest character within its story. Characters that have an understanding of these rules, even if only a little bit, have the capability to circumvent them. Naturally, these characters have been known to be some of the strongest. The Knight, for instance. Knowledge equals power in the most literal sense, and Ralsei has all of the knowledge. You would think he would be the greatest of party members, the strongest, most insightful, the one taking charge of every situation. But he doesn't. Ralsei knows everything, and he most certainly knows what he is capable of. He was cursed with this knowledge, and now I realize, every shortcoming, every perception of weakness is one he has decided to cradle himself. Ralsei has always held back. What I wonder is, what will happen when they finally decide to stop? Hello again, people, and welcome back to Thank you, Toby. You made my job way easier. Oh my god, Chapter 5 was amazing. Oh, it was so cool with the and then it did the and then it ended with the take this. Oh my god. He brought himself and Flowery into a battle just so he could how'd you like my Girona? This is so fucking cool. Welcome to my first video of the Chapter 5 era. While it did not manage to replace Chapter 4 as my favorite, Chapter 5 was a blast. We finally got the Ralsei chapter, or at least the closest thing to it without learning everything about him. Ralsei, I'm so proud of him. Or should I say, them. Today we're talking about Ralsei, his folly, his foil, and finally his freedom, which he has chosen to neglect for so long. I hope you enjoyed the video. After you're done watching it, please let me know what you thought. If you enjoyed the video, let me know what your favorite part was. If you didn't enjoy the video, let me know what I could have done better. And if you do end up enjoying the video, share it with a friend. Thank you. This section is referred to as the Folly because of the numerous mistakes Ralsei has made throughout the course of his journey. It should be noted that his mistakes are not entirely the fault of his own. He is new in the world of existence. I have always been of the belief that Ralsei was a few days old, maybe a week at the most, so therefore his understanding of things is not up to the same standard as, say, his teenage companions. These are reasonable examples of foolishness, but acts of foolishness nonetheless. In the beginning, there was simply Ralsei. He acted as our guide, and we immediately took notice of how informed he was on certain topics. He acted as our tutorial, explaining the ins and outs of battle. He took this upon himself, and it seems as though he was expecting our arrival. He made us a training dummy and a cute little manual. This was just like any other video game, and any mentioning of the game's elements was most likely done so for the player's benefit. It's just good practice to explain how the game works to the player in terms they would understand. Instances like this would remind the player that they are playing a video game, because these wouldn't be actual aspects of the world, right? This is Deltarune, and with Chapter 5 we get even more confirmation that everything within the game is diegetic. Just in case some people watching don't understand what that means, I'll briefly explain. The term diegetic is an adjective that describes something that holds the qualities of diegesis, the relaying of information in a fictional work through a narrative. If something is described as diegetic, then it exists or occurs within the world of a narrative rather than something external to that world. In most video games you have played, there are contextual actions, UI elements, and information systems that allow you to play said game. These elements are for the player's eyes alone, as they are the only people who need this information. Deltarune forgoes this player privilege. Not only are the UI elements included as things some characters are aware of, but also it seems that this game will tackle how characters within cope with the idea that their path is set. A path set before them by the narrative of the game itself. When you play Infamous 1, your best friend Zeke will always betray you. When you play KOTOR, you will always be playing as Darth Revan with amnesia. When you play Heavy Rain, Sean will always get kidnapped. These aren't random pulls, by the way. Each of these games boast a choice system that changes the narrative. Despite this element of player choice, the narrative looms over these stories and follows a similar path regardless. I suspect one of Deltarune's overall themes will encapsulate the emotions a character will go through when confronted with the certainty of their demise. It's one thing to have a story where the heroes are destined to lose. It's a whole new beast when the events are set within the files themselves. Cold and indifferent ones and zeros guide our protagonists along the track to destruction. Ralsei has always been aware of his fate, and in the beginning, he was just a Ralsei. He accepted it. This was Ralsei's first mistake, accepting his nature as a definitive thing. It's not his fault, as this is all he ever knew. Chapter 3 gives us a narrative bombshell that some of us were waiting on for years. Straight from the goat's mouth, we are informed of all the details which separate the light world and the dark world. Lightners create the darkners via the dark fountains. This often leads to certain darkners forming close and emotional connections with the lightners they serve. Especially in the most recent chapter, we get a systematic awareness of hierarchy. Ralsei slowly progresses from serving the Lightners as his purpose to serving them because he deeply cares about them. In his servitude, he seeks to give the Lightners peace, a home away from home in Castletown. This Castletown doesn't seem to be intrinsic to the prophecy at all. It just seems to be another example of the dark serving the light. It's almost like an instinct in some Darkners to serve Lightners, although I doubt this is a purely Darkner thing. Remember, Flowery specifically explains that he and his friends are neither Lightners nor Darkners. Following Ralsei's explanation of the Dark World, Susie is noticeably upset. She understood the material, yet she disagrees with the conclusion. Ralsei is real. She can see him, touch him, feel his emotions. When Ralsei hurts, Susie hurts. This is more than enough criteria to pass as real. At this stage, Ralsei has accepted that the Darkners' value is comparable to their utility. They are designed to be created, cherished, loved, and then forgotten just as quickly as they were made. This recurring theme of Darkners being forgotten is trying to say something, I feel. This overall message is pertinent to Ralsei's progress, so why don't we talk about this for a bit? The creation of a dark world is like one great work of art. The aspect of Darkners being forgotten really speaks to the relationship between an artist and their work. Art is oftentimes intimate to the artist. It's not always like this, but the artist can sometimes form deep sentimental attachments to their work. I suspect this is why Toby refuses to allow plushes of Lightner characters to be made. What are art pieces if not ideas that you give energy? Millions of ideas pass through your skull every day. Some you are only subconsciously aware of. Art is much more impactful because it is one of those unique ideas that you have chosen to give a physical form. In the light world, Sham is just a stuffed animal, made by someone played with, partially damaged to soon be forgotten. The dark world gave Sham new life, yet the emotions remain. While not as bitter as the king, they also hold a sensation of despair, being forgotten by the Lightners. Something that has also remained consistent is that the Dark World entity has greater significance the more attention it was given to by the Lightners. Queen was almost certainly the computer which Noelle used to write her personal blog. Tenna was given so much attention by the Holidays and the Dreamers, and of course, Flowery was given so much love and attention by Asgore. It seems like the more attention they get, the more devout and loyal they are to their light world creators. The artist and their love for their work can now be reciprocated. In the digital age, it becomes easier and easier to forget, to move on. We browse the internet and pass by several amazing works that took hours to make. We see it, gush over it, and then we move on. The artist may move on too, but that's just the nature of the landscape. Obviously, there is more dynamism than what I just described, although I easily see many pieces of fiction being forgotten. Remember all those video games I just mentioned? Good chance you had forgotten about them considering how old they are. Much like the Darkners of Deltarune, ideas can and probably will be forgotten in time. Whether it's old pieces of technology, old languages and text fonts, old methods of creating art, they have a chance to be forgotten. I think this is one of the many lessons of Deltarune. I feel like this is pretty on the mark considering the tagline of Deltarune has always been, "Don't forget." Ideas are made and forgotten in time, and Ralsei believes this to be the natural order of things. Susie protests this idea. This rejection is a major talking point of Chapter 3. She sees that her friend has disregarded the significance of his life. As you probably guessed, this acceptance is one of the many ways Ralsei has chosen to limit himself. His role is further reinforced in Chapter 3, being used as an object, literally providing the Lightners with a means to solve a puzzle. His value is tied to how useful he is. He is almost overjoyed to be used and stepped on. The whole reason he's so eager to play along with Tenna is the same as every Darkner. He wants his Lightner overlords to be happy. This desire almost feels paradoxical, as Ralsei's tireless quest to cater to his friends causes Susie a great deal of anguish, especially when he doesn't take care of himself. This disregard only continues in Chapter 4, as Ralsei has taken to combining the rooms of his Lightner friends for a party, while showing barely any attention to his own. This series of events is equally troubling as it is revealed that everything that Ralsei does is for the Lightner's sake. The food he cooks, the songs he sings, the home he has crafted is for the benefit of others. What was always interesting to me about Ralsei in this moment is that he was actively trying to hide it. He didn't want Susie to see that he had nothing, almost as if he knew that this way of life wasn't right. Or at the very least, he understood his friend well enough to know that she would have an issue with it. The lengths people would go to hide their pain. What seemed to be one of Ralsei's most virtuous qualities turned out to be one of his more self-destructive, certainly a valuable lesson. Obviously, I'm not arguing for you to stop helping people, but please remember to take care of yourself too. This brings us to our second mistake that Ralsei has made, desperately trying to protect his Lightner friends by withholding information. Ralsei knows the prophecy front to back, so he knows the narrative front to back. He understands the fate which awaits him and his friends. Knowing everything may seem like something that is empowering on the surface. Knowing the events before you gives you a prominent level of foresight, and therefore, power. We already mentioned how Ralsei's first mistake was that he accepted his fate. Rather than working to change it in a more meaningful way, he sought to change fate through kindness. Before we get into that, let's discuss the pain of knowing. Life can seem uncertain at times, and an equal level of fear could befall someone who has no idea what the future holds. Ralsei is a different case. He understands these future events and knows for a fact that the events described will happen. A vivid understanding of the future compiled with the dread of also knowing you can never change it. It must be truly painful. It is painful. This pain is one he truly didn't want Susie to experience, so he tried to hide it, desperately attempting to stop Susie from seeing the final prophecy without truly realizing that he wasted his time. Not because his path was so obstinate, but rather his efforts should have been pointed towards cooperating with Susie to change it. What was a genuine attempt to limit the pain felt by his friends was an endeavor of wasted energy. As we will discuss when we finally start talking about Chapter 5, Ralsei believes that prayer is a viable means to stop the prophecy from happening. He still isn't playing an active role in getting what he wants. It should be noted that there seems to be gaps in Ralsei's knowledge. As we learn in Chapter 5, the Knight has been around for a long time, most likely before Ralsei was even born. At the beginning of Chapter 5, Ralsei is seen doing what he always has, giving his friends a good time. This particular facet is one of the bigger pieces of criticism for Chapter 5 that I have noticed. A lot of people feel as though the story has taken a step back as this follows Chapter 4. There is a marginally low amount of talk about the future, the final prophecy, and the overall lore of the game. The argument, to my understanding, is not that the chapter is completely devoid of lore, it just doesn't have enough considering it follows Chapter 4. I'm not here to get into the weeds of this, mostly because I'm not sure if I understand the argument fully. I do think there are things that the Fun Gang could be doing rather than preparing for the festival, although there are perfectly reasonable explanations as to why they do this. Susie's reaction to the final prophecy was always something I interpreted as an act of defiance, although considering Susie's behavior in 5, I think I may have been wrong. Susie is more than likely in a state of denial throughout the majority of the chapter, which does fall in line with her seemingly strange reaction at the end of Chapter 4. Her laugh and smiling expression could mark her reluctance to believe the prophecy herself, and her new home in the dark world could fully support her need to escape. The information of Susie living inside Castletown now feels unceremonious. Yet I think it's easily explained by the fact that she's using the town to escape her troubles. Ralsei supports this, once again fulfilling his role of tending to the Lightner's wishes. I do believe the smart thing the Fun Gang should have done at the beginning of Chapter 5 would be to meet together and establish a game plan going forward. Potential strategies to use against the Knight, and maybe even pick up a few Darkners from Castletown and take them with you as backup. Rules card would be a definite first choice considering his abilities and his general distracting personality. No, I'm not just saying that because it would be funny and Rules would probably end up dead. Honest.
You know what? I think I'm willing to give up my pacifist run. I just want to beat up Rules.
This is the smart thing to do, but I would remind everyone watching this video right now that these are just a bunch of kids. Teenagers, right? Still, they are not adults by any stretch of the imagination. This is absolutely something you would expect from them considering their age. It's normal to not agree with the actions of a character on screen as it happens, but I think the main thing to look for is the understanding that this was the wrong choice down the line. For now, I would simply advise people to have some patience with Toby's story as it nears its conclusion. We will no doubt have characters making mistakes in the coming chapters. Cycling briefly back to the opening of Chapter 5, while this could be constituted as a mistake, there is a lot of effort put into making sure Susie has a fun date. Lancer gives you the means to decide on a wonderful new outfit for Susie, one of the many callbacks to Chapter 1. This all ends up being trash in the light world, which is both funny and a great example of how lost in escapism Susie has become. What's interesting is that Ralsei also knew that would happen, but he chooses to let Susie have her fun. Finally, before we move on to the events of Chapter 5 in earnest, I think we need to address potentially Ralsei's biggest mistake. Something he may regret. Something very, very bad. Waiting this long to wear a dress? Oh, doesn't he look so cute? Ooh, look at him. Look at him. Oh, he did a little twirl. Oh, they got that shit on dough. Okay, enough joking around. Let's talk about trans Ralsei for a bit. So, I should make myself clear up front. My official stance on trans Ralsei theory is the exact same as trans Noelle. It's none of our business unless Ralsei decides to make it our business. If there is a dedicated scene in Chapter 6 where Ralsei walks up to Chris and they're like, "Hey Chris, do you think I could be called they too?" My heart would melt, and I would be all for that. My unofficial opinion is that all we need to do is wait a little bit. Ralsei will come out when they are ready. We just gotta wait for him. It's any day now. You probably already noticed that I started using they them to address Ralsei. I didn't just pull that out of my tail feathers either. Ralsei officially unlocked a new pronoun this chapter. After you reach the upper castle area and are challenged by the 7 flowers, Ralsei's title changes to Dark Vine, watering their own thorns. The first and only time they are ever referred to as such, by the game itself, no less. Whenever trans Ralsei is brought up, a lot of people reference the scene where Flowery points out that Ralsei was looking at the blue and pink drink. As most of you probably know, blue and pink is the color combo often associated with the trans flag. Well, that and the color white, which Ralsei already has covered. Ralsei has been seen in a butler costume, something that's typically more masculine, and now this pretty dress, something that's typically more feminine. He really does look so happy in his dress. I love Ralsei so much. He's very excited and open to being Chris's princess. And my only issue with this is, damn it, Toby, why did you make it so we don't get the full scene if we have Starwalker? Why? Why must I be punished for having this bit of a character on my save file? I wanted to save Princess Ralsei from the castle. So Ralsei is absolutely going through some big changes, and I wanted to get this out of the way in the beginning because, as you may have noticed, I've been mainly using he/him to address Ralsei. But from here on, I will be alternating. Just wanted to explain why so people are all caught up on the Ralsei pronoun lore. I'm so proud of Ralsei, dude. We have so much more to talk about. And don't worry, we will be talking more about trans Ralsei. Let's move on. I do hope this opening section didn't give people the wrong idea. This isn't supposed to be a Ralsei critique as much as a setup for the numerous qualities of Ralsei's character that are going to be challenged throughout the chapter. How his very existence is challenged. The way of life which Ralsei has adopted is a direct result of his nature combined with his own decision to accept it. One recent development with Ralsei that I would never constitute as a mistake is his recent renovation of his room. Susie and co have been busy filling Ralsei's room to the brim with new items, and I think it's time for a little room analysis. So naturally, his room is mildly determined by the choices you made in the previous chapters. If you grab the Ice E statue from Noelle's room, it will be here only to be replaced by a trash can if you had forgotten it. Depending on who you gave your gift to in Chapter 2, Ralsei may have a tiny version of himself, which he cherishes tremendously. He does so because this was his first possession. Ralsei has now given himself a proper bed, which I dare say looks a bit nicer than the Lightner's beds. My only real comment on this is that he deserves it. Down in the corner, we have books filled with music and a tea set. Ralsei wants to try new drinks, explore the sensation of taste. Exercising his subjective palate is a big first step into creating his own opinions, something he only had echoes of in Chapter 4. Strangely, you can attempt to reinforce that idea that Ralsei only likes tea, perhaps a method of discouraging his change. Obviously, Chris is never willingly rude or discouraging to Ralsei, so they phrase this as a question. At least, this is my understanding based on Ralsei's response. He talks about how you or Chris might be the one who makes the tea in the future. Honestly, it's a bit hard to tell. The musical books came from Sweet, Cap, and KK. Ralsei seems to want to invest more into his singing, which is an interesting endeavor. It seems his confidence in his voice is improving as he wants to keep the Lightner's band alive. He's becoming more comfortable expressing himself through his voice. He just like me for real. This line about the window is a little on the nose, but still pretty fun. It's in reference to an analysis of a main character's room, just like I'm doing right now. At least, I think that's what this is referencing. The window has remained, despite Ralsei making changes to the room. The window was there from the beginning, so it seems like it implies that it was a first genuine decision Ralsei made when shaping his room. Perhaps it's also a representation of Ralsei's dreams, how he would love to be able to look out of a window and see the sunrise despite living in the dark world. What, you think just because the game makes fun of me for analyzing it, I'm going to stop? No. Also, we see Ralsei's hat. It seems it was not lost forever, and instead, Ralsei decided to track it down and leave it on his bed. A nice little nod to Chapter 1 once again. It seems as though Ralsei has become more distinct, forming his own personality, but decided to hold on to the hat as a memento to remind him of a time where he was afraid to show his face. I am so glad Ralsei isn't afraid to show his face to people anymore, and he will never need that hat ever again. Now that we've properly established all the things about Ralsei that will be addressed in this chapter, I think it's time we start the show proper. I feel like Toby was in a pretty precarious situation for Chapter 5. He needed to develop Ralsei as a character, but he also did not want to give away any of the mysteries which surrounded them. Well, I don't think we're going to have to wait too much longer to figure out what's going on with Ralsei. They did a fantastic job responding to this dilemma. The solution comes in the form of
Gerona!
I'm sorry?
Glue!
Who is that?
Flowery!
Oh. This wonderful little scamp is Flowery. Flowery the flower, or maybe I should say Flowery the human? He would love to be considered a human, but for the sake of consistency, let's make one thing clear from the beginning. The 7 new colorful characters that spend the majority of the chapter trying to stop us and keep Asgore happy are neither Lightener nor Darkener. They are in a class all their own. Most likely not as strong as a Lightener, but far mightier than your typical Darkener. This opens up some new, interesting avenues for speculation on the nature of Dark Worlds in general. Anatomy of Dark Worlds update video is on the way, but for now, let's discuss Flowery some more. Flowery is pretty much everything that Ralsei is against. Flowery's continuous disregard for the rules of this world make Ralsei's potentially non-existent blood boil. Just to clear up a potential misconception, Ralsei and Flowery did not have a previous history before the Dark World formed in Chapter 5. Ralsei has all but been confirmed to have this strange awareness of Dark World denizens and their nature. Ralsei is able to detect everything that Flowery is doing, but he had no prior knowledge of him. Flowery is given a rough introduction when it comes to interacting with the main cast. He stuffs Ralsei in a closet, and when they pop out, the only name Ralsei can come up with is that flower guy. Flowery has only recently met Ralsei, however, he has an acute level of knowledge when it comes to Chris. They made this dark world most likely as a distraction to stop Susie from learning about Rudy. Or maybe this was always a part of the plan. Chris will eventually get their update video as well, but I just want the record to show that Flowery does know Chris. Flowery also seems to have a pretty strong opinion of them too. Every so often he gives these passive-aggressive comments towards Chris, and of course we have Flowery actively working against Chris behind the scenes. Flowery is the one who tells Susie about the shelter code hidden in the pot which houses him. I will get more into this when we get around to discussing Chris, although let the record show that Flowery is absolutely aware of Chris's work and how them opening up the Dark World has now put Asgore in danger. This is why he tries to get Chris to leave on several occasions. Flowery seems to not be the biggest fan of Chris, which is more than likely a result of his own perspective. In Flowery's eyes, Asgore is a kind and loving father who constantly worries about a family who ignores him. From his glass cage, he developed this one-sided opinion of Asgore. Using his newfound power and agency, he seeks to make a perfect world for his Flower King. Doomed Yaoi aside, it seems that Flowery's sheer existence is an insult to Ralsei. To understand this, we need to understand the flowers a little bit more. The flowers are not darkeners, but they do cater to the whims of a lightener. This is the first big shift in what we previously understood. Well, it's more accurate to say this is the first edition. Darkeners are still beholden to the light, but these guys just match that vibe in their own way. From my understanding, the Omega flowers are stronger than your typical darkener, and the reason why is because of their better understanding of the world and its systems. For example, during the hilarious antics of Seth and Aqua, Seth takes note of which of Aqua's attacks gave you the most trouble, and tells Aqua to use that attack. Before that, they literally just ignored your attempts to spare through mercy. Manipulating the game's systems comes as easy to them as breathing, it seems. They do it so naturally, it makes you wonder how they instinctively knew how to do it. I have my own theories, but we're talking about Ralsei today. Using his greater level of control over the world, Flowery has given himself maximum stats. This absolutely infuriates Ralsei, sending him into an inferno of jealousy. Just to be clear, the reason why Flowery did everything he did was because he did not want Asgore to see Ralsei. It seems like even Flowery is aware of how similar they look to Chris's brother. Overall, it's in Flowery's best interest if Asgore doesn't ask too many questions, so therefore he stuffed Ralsei into a closet. But does he know? Yeah, I think Flowery knows more about Ralsei than even they do. I still don't think it was a cool thing to do, though. Let's talk about Ralsei's hat. Why is it here? I mean, this is Ralsei's hat, right? Actually, no. After a quick look, it's not his hat specifically. You can walk up to the closet and get a hat for Chris and Susie. So Flowery made other hats for Ralsei to hide their face. So this moment momentarily disproved a big theory I've had about Ralsei for a while, that of which being his form is amorphous and he can change it at will. Keep in mind, I said momentarily. Ralsei's face was hidden to the point where the silhouettes never matched up 100% in Chapter 1. The game tries to lampshade this by using the hat as an excuse. In Chapter 4, when you are in the mic room, you can put a hat onto Ralsei and his form stays exactly the same. Simultaneously in Chapter 1, and in Chapter 5 for that matter, Ralsei has this fun little animation where if he uses an item, he lifts up his hat. Now, the reintroduction of the hat turning Ralsei into his dark form seems to punch a hole in this theory. That is until you happen across this gag later in the chapter where this pumpkin can stretch Ralsei like a piece of putty. He seems pretty okay, so I think amorphous Ralsei theory is still alive and well. Although, I have a feeling imaginary friend theory might not be entirely correct anymore. After all of that setup, let's get back into the reintroduction of Ralsei. Ralsei falls from the closet absolutely annoyed by Flowery's actions. Obviously, the first impression between these two is not great. Flowery is actively making Ralsei hide himself. Technically, it's for a good reason, but I don't really care. I have no interest in keeping Chris and Flowery's charade afloat by stopping Asgore from asking questions. Ralsei should not have to hide himself. This is what made me particularly annoyed with Flowery in the beginning. Throughout most of the chapter, it becomes abundantly clear that Ralsei has no patience for this flower. Susie, as well as several other people in the community, have taken to calling Ralsei a hater because of this. I personally love this new energy that Ralsei brings in this chapter. How some moments involve him losing his temper and being all sassy. I love this sassy little goat. I love them so much. He does become terse with other people, but he very specifically has a bone to pick with Flowery. To start off, Flowery is pretending to be a human. He introduces himself as Asgore's college roommate and proceeds to subvert all of the game's rules. Ralsei serves lighteners and therefore humans. Naturally, he holds the lighteners to a high standard, believing them to be the gods of this world. In a way, they literally are. To see someone pretend to do this goes against his opinion of how unique and amazing the lighteners are. The flowers are essentially human LARPers. If you talk to Yellow in the diner, he seems to not only be confused as to what a cowboy eats, but also implies that he was told that cowboys do very specific cowboy things. They are all trying to appear more human for Asgore's sake, pretending to be something they are not. This is one of the underlying reasons why Ralsei is annoyed by the flowers, but what really makes him crash out is Flowery ignoring the rules. Flowery has officially let himself go. leveraging the fake stats defined by the game world to do incredible things. Ralsei has always been the weak one. He allows himself to be thrown around, stepped on, he has the lowest health pool. This perception of weakness is always something Ralsei has been labeled with. Chapter 4 gave us this moment where a suit of armor that roughly equaled the power of Gerson was giving Susie and Chris trouble. Susie thought it was the old man, so she was clearly holding back, but Ralsei was still able to sneak up behind it and insta-kill the thing at full health. This moment was only a hint, but Chapter 5 gave us the hard confirmation that Ralsei is stronger than he would ever allow you to believe. The concept of Ralsei holding back has sparked a bit of a debate in the community. If Ralsei was always holding back, then why would he ever allow X, Y, and Z to happen? Fair question, but that one requires more contextual clarity that we don't currently have, so let's continue. Flowery's OP stats become very obvious when he briefly joins your party. After stomping Ralsei like a Goomba, Flowery adds himself to the group to help you solve the love door puzzle. Obviously, this is all for show. Flowery more than likely set this up to try and bring the Lightners to his side. Looking into Flowery's section of the menu, we see that he really does have 99 in all stats, and some pretty overpowered gear. He is equipped with his winning smile, the petal mantle, and his Sunday petal mantle. I knew that coat looked familiar. This gorgeous little save file editing scallywag has a mantle. Okay, so let's talk about this whole situation, and maybe we'll have time to touch on the presence of gear within Deltarune's story. Chapter 3 has this extra path that can only be done if you achieve S rank in Tenna's boards. You can also get there if you do incredibly poorly. People have already speculated the visual representation of events within the sword route, but the overall achievement when you win is this little item called the Shadow Mantle. The Shadow Mantle is this special armor that gives you bonus resistance to dark/star type attacks. This gives you a big defense boost when you fight the knight. So the whole thing about the Shadow Mantle is that it was this super important piece of armor that you needed to beat the knight. It is possible to beat them without the mantle, but if you get hit without it, it's pretty much GG. Now we have this petal mantle, and I have so many questions. So not only are there multiple mantles, but these mantles have been distributed across the Dark Worlds. I can only assume that the person who gave Chris their Shadow Mantle is the same person who gave Flowery the Petal Mantle. Considering the relatively new dialogue, which paints the Shadow Mantle holder as some kind of mastermind who has the ability to control several friends, I would say this tracks. Does the Petal Mantle give a similar defense boost? I guess it really doesn't matter considering Flowery lost to the knight anyways, but this should be big news. It turns out there are these super strong mantles out there that can be used. We still have not received any new information on the Sky Mantle, but with the Petal Mantle, we can officially say this is a pattern. Now I should bring up the idea that this Petal Mantle could simply be a nothing Sunday, window dressing for the flashy temple that is Flowery. In a very important moment down the line, his flowery scarf does shift into a broken scarf. It is revealed in the description that the scarf was all for show. This may be telling us that Flowery wasn't really as strong as he seemed and his gear was all BS. If this were the case, then the Petal Mantle would be a funny Flowery fanfic version of the very real Shadow Mantle. I do think this isn't 100% the case, and to explain why, we need to dive into the concept of items and gear in general. Items, resources, accessories, and such are supposedly real-world objects that have been warped by the nature of the Dark Worlds. This naturally raises the question of why some items become consumables and others become people, although I feel the answer to that falls outside the scope of the current video. My current running theory is intent of the Fountain Maker or even a Lightner's direct relationship to that item in question. For example, if you have a lovely stuffed animal that you care for immensely, it will become a Darkner. If you have a ham sandwich that you don't have any sentimental attachment to, it will become a consumable. The key here is that while the events which take place are very real and have real-world consequences, the functioning of the Dark World sits snugly in the same vein as a dream. Dreams have always been prominently mentioned in Deltarune, and now it seems that this comparison is becoming more and more relevant. A dream is best described as a deep aspiration or hope. Yet the act of having a dream is described as a long series of hallucinations. If you become lucid during your dreams, you have the ability to consciously control them. To put it plainly, the dark worlds are dreams brought to life. Logic and reality are not as concrete within them as they are in the light world, or at least that is what we currently understand from the information provided. I have a sneaking suspicion that logic is malleable in the light world too, considering recent events. So knowing that most if not all of the actions in a dark world can and have run on dream logic, this puts every item we have ever found into question. If this really is all dream rules, then what is stopping the Shadow Mantle from giving us 999 stats just like Flowery has? We have all the power in the world when it comes to Deltarune, so we can just use a save editor to bump up the stats in the game files, right? Well, no, actually. You see, if you ever manipulate the game files, you get one of Deltarune's many dog check screens that stop you from doing just this. Toby actually has a lot of fun with these, as you get a different one depending on the chapter you're playing. Chapter 5 is a reference to Danganronpa. Obviously, Toby Fox does this to maintain the integrity of the game. Flowery is not an invitation to mess with the game, but rather a statement about how a person can use a system in their own favor when it would normally work against them. There are fundamental reasons why a game developer does not want you messing with the game files. It would spoil the game experience, remove any challenge, and like Ralsei brings up, ruin the economy. This is one of the greater reasons Ralsei is so upset with Flowery, which we'll get to, but back to the items. Despite running off dream logic, there are a set of rules present in the world of Deltarune. For example, any party member can only have 2 armors equipped. It's all a simple game, you see. If you follow the rules, the game works as intended. But just like Flowery states later,
rules are a suggestion.
Flowery does in fact have maximum stats in everything, but the stats are ignoring the overall revelation in such that the stats are pointless. The stats are like an anchor for context, you see. If anything and everything were possible in the dark worlds at any given moment, it would not function as a video game. Flowery is only just playing along with the game rules while giving himself an unfair advantage. Ralsei is also playing along, but out of principle he allows himself to be limited, playing fair. They don't give themselves any big items or big stats, quite the opposite, as it would seem that Ralsei has made themselves the weakest party member. Flowery has not given himself maximum stats in everything to make himself the strongest, he has done this to openly mock the concept of the stats in general. The stats are worthless. The reason for this is not clear, although it seems like there is a set of unspoken rules that the Darkners are expected to follow. It's like someone sat down with Ralsei and explained to him exactly how the world works and explained that while he holds enough knowledge to dismantle the game world as we know it, he should never exercise this power for the sake of other people. I can't pretend to know the exact reason why, but I have to believe the reason was a good one. The fact of the matter is that Ralsei has been following the rules for the majority of his life. This relinquishment has put him and the people he cares about into serious life or death scenarios, and as a result, his helplessness has caused him incredible emotional pain. Then here comes this Tumblr sexy man headass who just ignores all of that and gives himself maximum stats, completely neglecting any of the responsibility that comes with knowing what he knows. Ralsei and Flowery are truly opposites, 2 characters who have been met with similar circumstances to arrive at separate conclusions. Flowery has been dumped into this role of a pristine little flower that Flower will be forced to watch as his owner comes to grips with his own grief. All the while, the owner's family neglects or even outright ignores him. Flowery more than likely felt the pain that Asgore felt living in solidarity for so long, and wished to bring him happiness again. That's what this is to Flowery. He's just paying back all the kindness that Asgore showed him. This is one of the main reasons why I always found Flowery so interesting. He has been given a limited life, and now he has the potential to change all of it for the better. Of course he's going to bend the rules to do so. Ralsei is in a very similar circumstance. He is the prince alone in deepest dark. His role is to serve the light and eventually wither away. He has the power to do so much more, yet he has accepted his destiny out of principle. To see Susie praise such disregard for the rules has Ralsei fuming. He looks in front of him and realizes that there is a sliver of a chance that Flowery is right. Ralsei criticizes Flowery, and without missing a beat, he snaps back, calling Ralsei the expert. Ralsei's reaction to Susie's interest stops him from continuing the conversation any further, so Flowery leaves. Later, we see a repeat of a puzzle from Chapter 1. The puzzle becomes impossible to complete as it requires 4 buttons to be held down at once. No doubt being aware of how the puzzle is supposed to play out. This change was most likely caused by Flowery, as one of the many means he is using to keep the fun gang away from Asgore. Susie thinks that the solution is to simply track down Flowery, and she's off. Susie walks through the spikes like she said she did back in Chapter 1. The process appears to be not as painful as you would have thought back then. Having been left with no other option, Ralsei takes Chris by the hand and guides them through the spikes as well, also appearing to be a painless endeavor. What follows warrants another discussion about the way the game works. Susie has met with Flowery, who has explained to her how the voice clips work. Flowery specifically has voice clips that accompany his dialogue, being the second character to have this. The first obviously being Jevil.
Flowery.
I can do anything.
No, no, no.
I can do anything.
No, no, no.
I can do anything.
Sorry about that, little guy.
These voice clips are separate from his actual dialogue sound effect and appear to be something he has direct control of. Ralsei is upset over Susie receiving all of this information, so he informs Chris that they can turn off the clips in the configure menu. Almost in retaliation, Flowery reveals that you can turn off Ralsei's voice in the menu as well. So there are a few interesting consequences based on what you can do in this scene. If you turn off voice clips before even getting to this room, Flowery will explain how using them wouldn't be polite in front of people who turn them off. Flowery was using them earlier when talking to Susie, but has decided to stop since Chris and the player are now here. When Ralsei questions this, Flowery snaps back, stating that Susie should decide whether or not she wants to hear them. Having his own beliefs used against him, Ralsei is stunned. If Susie wants to be able to hear the voice clips, then she can. As we've already discussed, Ralsei sees the Lightners and their ability to make choices far above himself. Flowery has used Ralsei's own logic against them, and it works. He offers Chris the chance to turn the voice clips back on, which Ralsei is not fond of either. He then questions if Ralsei thinks their opinion on the matter is more important in some way. On the surface, Flowery seems like he's just rage baiting, but I cannot disagree more. He understands Ralsei and how paradoxical their ideologies are, poking holes in them as big as the fountain which allowed this conversation to happen in the first place. This is Flowery attempting to show Ralsei that his ideals are misguided and he should value his own wishes to the same level as the Lightners. This falls short as Ralsei once again defers to Chris to make the decision. If you had the voice clips on, the scene plays out mostly the same. If you do decide to turn off Flowery's voice clips when informed you can, he uses the voice clips one final time to make his point, while stating that
Rules are a suggestion.
a line that will remain relevant for the duration of this video. Flowery then proceeds to make his own pathway of grass as a sort of metaphorical middle finger before he pieces out. If you decide to turn off Ralsei's voice in the menu, Flowery will actually look displeased. Honestly, I can't tell if he's being sarcastic when he tells us to be nicer to Ralsei, although I will say, if you turn off both the voice clips and Ralsei, he will always default to the Ralsei line, which implies that he cares more about Ralsei than his own voice clips. Ralsei will continue to not have a voice throughout this area, which means he will sit still when you get to the puzzle later and be unable to call out to Susie. If you leave the voice clips on, they will be able to call out to Susie, who has caught up to Flowery once again. She is sporting a brand new ribbon, this time with spikes. This has Ralsei scratching his head, as Susie has never had the desire to wear ribbons in the past. Flowery has this way of reading people. He understands that Susie has specific interests. The ribbons never interested her in the past, as she didn't vibe with them. So, Flowery gave her a ribbon that matched her personality better. Nothing has really changed about Susie, she is just being opened up to a new way of seeing things. Out of fear that Flowery is explaining all of the things that Ralsei has been keeping from Susie, they seek to get over there as quickly as possible. If they still have their voice, then they will bend the rules a bit in their favor, kicking the boxes up in the air and solving the puzzle instantly. They seem to have taken a page out of Flowery's book regardless of their protest earlier. If Ralsei doesn't have their voice, they will simply stand and wait until you solve the puzzle naturally. Well, for the most part they will. The puzzle is a tad difficult, but it is doable. Funnily, if you fail the puzzle enough times, he will form a bridge and help you across. When the two meet back up with Susie, she praises the sound clips once again,
If Ralsei's voice is off, Flowery will come by and give Ralsei some healing pollen. I'm using quotes around healing pollen because it's all nonsense. In case there's any confusion on what just happened, I'll explain it in full. Taking into account every variation of this scene, we now understand that the player can use the UI to affect the world in meaningful ways. If given the opportunity, they can remove a character's ability to talk, and that's probably not the worst thing they can do. Confusingly, technically what I just said was false. The user interface that causes things in the game to shift and change is bogus. Well, it is bogus, but it's also not bogus. Remember, rules are a suggestion. The characters within are only subservient to what it says if they allow themselves to follow the rules. Ralsei could have talked the entire time when you turned off his voice. He just decided not to as a matter of principle. It was a dumb principle, don't get me wrong, but the explanation still stands. If a Dark World being possesses enough knowledge of the world, they can either change or deny the rules of the world at will, more than likely using their own will to do this. This is purely a desire to act, as Ralsei could not do what Flowery did because he lacked the drive to do so. The rules of the world also follow this dreamlike, make-believe rule system that is its own level of nonsense. There is no such thing as healing pollen. Flowery just made that up on the spot so Ralsei could get his voice back. Say what you will, but ultimately, Flowery is a nice guy. He just disagrees with Ralsei on the very purpose of their existence, so they clash. This all leads to Ralsei explaining the game's UI. This has been long known on the metatextual side of things, it's just nice to get confirmation. Every UI element from the combat screen to the UI of the item menu is a part of the world that can be altered, seemingly very easy. I guess now would be as good a time as ever to give my thoughts on why Ralsei was so cautious about divulging this information, or even utilizing this information for himself. Think back to his protest about the chest with infinite money and how Flowery gave himself 99 in everything. All of Ralsei's protests are due to Flowery upsetting the challenge of the game. We can have all of the meta conversations we want. At the end of the day, Deltarune has to function as a video game. But think about how this game plays with the idea of roles. Much like Ralsei was given the role of Prince of Darkness, Deltarune takes on the role of a video game in our world. If it doesn't properly fill this role, then people will lose interest and stop playing. The player is just as much a god in the sense that the Lightners are the gods of the Darkners. Ralsei is not just concerned with being perceived as weird, he's straight up concerned with existing. If the game doesn't function as it should, then Ralsei and all of the Lightners don't get to exist anymore. Now, perhaps this goes outside the scope of what Ralsei specifically understands. Maybe he only sees these rules as just things he needs to abide by, and those rules just so happen to safeguard the integrity of the game. From the way it sounds, it seems like he maintains this cadence to keep himself in control, or maybe even stopping the game from getting out of control. I could easily see this falling into the realm of meta-commentary regarding the overall expectations of what a video game is supposed to accomplish. Most seasoned video game enthusiasts have this platonic idea of what a video game should do. Sometimes the absolute adherence to this set of rules can make a game stale, appearing to be too similar to other games. This similarity is one of the biggest critiques of modern AAA gaming. What I think this will ultimately amount to is this idea of a game adhering to these rules will eventually be cast aside. You could say it already has. There are moments where Susie and Ralsei act independently later in the chapter. Player control and choice is being disregarded, but it's not entirely a bad thing. What I find interesting, that may require its own video in the near future, is how Ralsei describes it. Another layer. Oh, what is this game but another example of the recursive narrative structure? A kaleidoscopic trend of seemingly infinite narratives, each stacked on top of each other, cascading down until creation is just a myth. If you remember the first time I said that, then you are a G. Let's move on. Now that Flowery is there to help, he can assist the Lightners in solving the puzzle. Very important detail to note is that Flowery initially takes the place where Ralsei initially stood. Not a mistake. Flowery is literally telling us that Ralsei could have been the one to solve the puzzle with the 4 buttons before. Flowery takes it a step further by moving all the Lightners aside so he can solve the puzzle all by himself. The display is genuinely impressive, although Ralsei is still caught up in his jealousy. He states that he could have done the exact same thing, and yes, he could have. It's become very clear that the Inferno of Jealousy is not a facet of Asgore's character, but a selection of other characters who may feel jealous, Ralsei being the biggest. It should be noted that Ralsei absolutely could have done what Flowery did without all the flair. Ralsei can absolutely make good on all of his threats, which surprisingly he will make a good amount of in this chapter. It really doesn't help that Susie is skeptical of his abilities, having not seen his display of puzzle cheesing earlier. Flowery has somehow made a pillar of light which leads back to the light world. Honestly, it probably isn't that hard to do considering his knowledge, but the die is cast. Flowery is nicely asking the group to leave. He has more than displayed his power, and to him this gives the Fun Gang enough proof that Asgore is safe. Unfortunately, this deal is not acceptable to the group, and they are planning to seal the fountain as they always have. Flowery protests, almost ignoring the idea of the knight showing up and cutting into his adventure. All Asgore needs is a human. This idea only makes Ralsei more offended. The humans are Lightners, the very same he worships. Not only does this step on Ralsei's rosy-eyed opinion of the Lightners, it devalues the status which a Lightner possesses within the Dark World. I have to say, if this interpretation is true, I am on Flowery's side. Susie would be as well. A Lightner's life should not be more valuable than a Darkner's life. There appears to be this implied idea of hierarchy within the Dark World, a hierarchy which Ralsei reinforces despite being on the bottom level. As we will explore more the next time we see Flowery, there is a portion of Ralsei's thoughts that wishes that Flowery was successful, but the person who is trying to also change his own fate is doing so by breaking all of Ralsei's life tenets. It must be very frustrating to see. Someone trying to accomplish your dream in all the ways that you swore off of doing out of principle. Pressure can form diamonds, but it can also form... It's really up to Ralsei what they decide to become.
Hello everyone, brief announcement before we continue. I am on Blue Sky, and recently I've become much more active on there. If you ever want to know what I'm thinking about or see my art, go ahead and follow me there. Also down below is a link to the Nighthawk Discord server. We have a growing community of over 300 members, and we would love to have you there. Content of the server is safe for work, but it is adults only, so keep that in mind. Okay, thank you. Back to the video. Freedom. The absence of necessity, coercion, or constraint in choice or action. Ralsei and their freedom is not really discussed in-game, as it is not something on Ralsei's mind. When given freedom of direction and choice, Ralsei seems to turn away. When faced with a choice that benefits them and them alone, they still allow Chris to choose for them. Freedom is not always free, but the pursuit of freedom is always a choice. A choice Ralsei is reluctant to make. Throughout the many interesting events of the Flower Castle, Ralsei is pushed to make decisions for themselves once again. Ralsei is a butler once again, much more jaded by the circumstance this time around. This face is hilarious, by the way. You can be as angry as you want, Ralsei, it won't stop you from looking cute. He sheds the suit, explaining that the context of servitude affected the enjoyment for him. Flowery more than likely forced Ralsei to wear the butler suit, just like he did the hat. This is an assumption. I have no proof that this happened, although I feel like it's a pretty good guess. Not to jump ahead, but Flowery will mention that Ralsei likes to serve humans. Within this context, Ralsei is being coerced to serve non-humans pretending to be such. Freedom these flowers possess is being dangled in front of Ralsei's face as they have claimed a role that is not what they are. After some funny hijinks, Yellow and Blue are now our friends. Blue is sort of in tune with the concept of love and the pursuit of such. Blue seeks to give Susie advice on flowers, so they both leave Chris and Ralsei alone. In a surprising twist, Ralsei advocates for leaving Susie be, giving her some privacy this time around. While not as Lord Dense as Chapter 4, I personally received some interesting insight into my own theories in Chapter 5. For instance, I was always under the assumption that the change of perspective was strictly a Chris and Susie thing. an unseen bond between the two that the soul was following to allow the Suzy scenes to happen. This does throw a small wrench into Chris-Suzy soul fusion theory, but I am still moderately hopeful for this coming to pass. I mean, shippers would love this. Suzy and Chris form a new person, and that person technically comprised of both of them ends up with Noelle. Everybody wins. Ralsei has now decided that it's best to allow Suzy some time to herself. The mechanical function of these moments being Suzy exclusive is further disproved by Ralsei's stance on the matter. He believes these moments are an invasion of her privacy. Her conversation with Blue is one of intense personal emotions, and having learned a lot about friendship, he wants to respect this. Suzy deserves to be free of the constant watch of the player. I am now of the belief that this is a special circumstance of the soul specifically, which does sort of complicate things for the future, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And just for the record, in case some of you forgot, Ralsei was not there during the fight with the Sound of Justice, so it cannot be something that was specific to Ralsei. You can share an interesting conversation if you decide to go and watch Suzy, but this is a Ralsei video, damn it. Suzy can wait. Deciding to hang out with Ralsei will prompt Flowery to show up briefly. It's clear that the Flower Man is taking the situation less than serious. He doesn't even look dejected when Ralsei threatens to seal away the dark fountain which made this world. Instead, he claps back, implying that the person who made this fountain in the first place is also deserving of blame. This, of course, brings us to Chris. Chris will get their own update video on the matter, but for now, it seems like their resolve has not changed despite putting their immediate family into danger. Let's talk about Ralsei's reaction to this moment. I think it's very fair to say my assumption from the release of Chapter 4, where Ralsei instinctively can sense the creation of a dark fountain and who made it, is correct. Now, I do have another explanation which is a little harder to argue given the lack of evidence. This theory is all based around my study of how the Dark Worlds work and an assumption I made based on the information we know Ralsei has. Basically, I came to the conclusion that Ralsei has the capability to watch his friends from the shadows, quite literally. The Dark Worlds are another plane of existence, so Ralsei has the ability to peer into the Light World from the same position inside the Dark World. This would explain why Ralsei has no issues with watching Suzy in the past, as well as an explanation as to why he knows who opened up each Dark World. The one thing we can say for sure is that Ralsei is 100% aware that Chris made this Dark World in particular. Flowery is too, having watched Chris as they made the fountain. Funnily, this also implies that Flowery knew about the deal between Chris and Seth, and decided to allow Seth to let them loose anyways. Ralsei is stun-locked after Flowery brings this information to the forefront. Chris most certainly won't defend themselves, and my only question is, why did Flowery not tell Suzy? He would have so much to gain from telling her, as this would make the fellowship between them waver. Unless he did, and Suzy is just keeping it to herself, much like Ralsei is. Much later in the chapter, when you find the shelter code, Suzy mentions how Flowery told her about the code. She also explains that Flowery told her not to tell anybody else about it. So, sometimes I feel like people are more than willing to excuse Suzy not asking questions because she's oblivious. I've always had issues with this because Suzy may be oblivious when it comes to certain things about herself and how people feel about her, but not all the time. She definitely picks up on Ralsei trying to hide things from her in Chapter 4, but she never really questions it until after things boil over. It bothers her, don't get me wrong, but she was aware nonetheless. I think it would be very strange if Flowery told Suzy where the shelter code was, tell her to keep that info to herself, and not explain why she should keep the info to herself. Flowery was all about giving Suzy information. Why would he not be forthcoming with something like that? He pretty much accuses Chris of being an awful person for opening up the fountain right in front of Ralsei. I think Suzy knows. She's not as oblivious as people think she is, and this could be another reason why she has decided to bring in Noelle. Regardless, Ralsei is beside himself. To think that one of the Great Lighteners, his friend, is the one who opened up this fountain. This does eventually spark a conversation between the two, which is about as one-sided as you could imagine. Well, technically we talk to Ralsei, so maybe it's like two-thirds sided, sort of. The two walk off and spend some time in the hot spring.
Ralsei takes off his glasses, and we see after he shakes they look different compared to how they were presented before. Ralsei explains that he had water in his eyes. I have no idea if this means something or not. If I'm being completely honest, I was initially planning on going on a side tangent to specifically talk about this, but I will spare you from that. This entire conversation reverts back to freedom, specifically the freedom of information. Restricting the information of another person can push them to make less than ideal decisions. Despite their age, Chris is 100% aware of this, and yet they restrict information from Susie all the time. If they manage to obtain the shelter code in Chapter 4, then Noelle would not potentially be put into danger in Chapter 6 or 7 for that matter. There's a few dialogue options here. Being as direct as possible, you can bring up the Dark Fountain. No matter how Chris spins the phrase, Ralsei knows what we are talking about and he responds. Choosing his words carefully, he explains the situation in such a way where I am absolutely certain he is talking to Chris. In the past, there was always a little wiggle room to determine whether or not Ralsei was addressing Chris or the player, but in this moment, Ralsei is commenting on Chris's actions specifically. He makes his stance very clear, reiterating the information he has already explained. Ralsei is not angry with Chris, although he has every right to be. His stance on the roaring and the ramifications of opening up the fountains was always clear. Chris knows this. You could even argue they knew before Ralsei even told them. Ralsei cannot even begin to understand the motivation, but he has decided to put his trust into Chris regardless. Ralsei recounts the previous day when Chris played the piano. The way the keystrokes danced from the motion of Chris's hands, the way the sound escaped the metal chambers of the instrument. Ralsei felt something. They were moved, just like I was several months ago. I cannot stress enough how certain I am that Chris still possesses their soul. It may be fractured or weak or segmented, but it is still there. We hear it, we feel it, because we are people and we understand the story that Chris Dreamer is telling us. The story of their hopes, the story of their dreams, the will they have which brought this very fountain to life mere hours ago. Ralsei heard all of it, and he could not ignore it. After knowing their actions and hearing their song, Ralsei understood. Whatever Chris was doing, there was a reason for it. So Ralsei trusts them. Ralsei explains how he tried to replicate Chris's song. Memorizing and tapping every note is impressive, but no matter how hard Ralsei tried, he could not play it the same way. It was lost to him. This doesn't have as much to do with Ralsei being a Darkner. After all, he can sing wonderfully. I honestly wondered how effective a Darkner could create fiction all their own. Ralsei can create things too, just not in the exact same way that Chris can. This almost looks like it saddens him. To know that there will always be a pain that Chris feels which manifests in their song that Ralsei could not replicate. Never understand. Strife plus experience plus dedication equals art. Despite Ralsei's love for Chris's melody, I feel he comes just short of understanding the full lesson. Ralsei sees this ability to play the piano as something special to Chris. While technically he is right, it is not by merit that they are the hero. Ralsei is still thinking in roles. He believes the part you play is declarative of your worth in life when it is not. The reason why Ralsei could not match the sounds and play the same song is not because Chris specifically is unique, it is because Ralsei is unique. They both are, for the record, but you understand what I'm trying to say. Ralsei has not lived the same life as Chris, so naturally he would not be able to play the same way. He comes just shy of understanding this, but he comes to the conclusion of trusting Chris anyways. The wording he uses almost makes me think this is giving us context to the final prophecy. Ralsei still wants to avoid the ending, referring to the prophecy, and he continues by saying that if a happy ending exists, that Chris should absolutely be a part of it. Really, it's still anyone's guess as to what the final prophecy said, but something about it makes me think it had something to do with Chris specifically. Then again, I also feel like if that was the case, then Susie would be more focused on looking out for them, and it seems like her thoughts are always on Noelle. I do feel like what Ralsei says later when praying is relevant to this, so I'll reserve this conversation for now. When Ralsei says all of this, you can respond in a multitude of ways, all of which, and pretty much the same. Susie jumps in, does a cannonball, and oh my god, the option where you can honk Susie's nose, which causes her to snap, is so damn cute. I love them all forever. Although, the way in which Susie always ends up in this scene has me a little worried. No matter what options you pick, Susie always runs in and crashes the party, covering both Ralsei and Chris with water. Even if you choose not to go into the water in the first place, it happens no matter what. Water's association with darkness has maintained itself, even with the new chapter, so we can assume that the connection between the two is as strong as ever. If I were to philosophically predict here, it's almost as if this scene is made to reinforce the prophecy and its unyielding fate. Susie will fall and the world will be covered in darkness. Water from the hot spring is darkness, and Susie falling is Susie falling. I absolutely hope I'm just reaching here. Ralsei has another moment to talk to Flowery right after you beat Green and Orange. Before we do that, let's talk about the shade between Ralsei and Orange. So I just want to make this clear. I'm not taking either person's side in this, although I do feel like the community takes Orange's side way more often. So let's talk about that. The things that Ralsei says to Orange are insanely out of pocket. However, I just want the court to be aware that Orange swings some insults too, and it seems like a lot of people forget about that little detail. Aww. Orange? Wanted to check on you. Leave me alone, you big ugly hatless long-eared freak. Damn. Damn, Orange. I would relate this situation akin to a child who is fighting with a slightly younger child. Or I'm telling my big sis. Big sis? Big sis? What's her name? Marigold the giant rat? You make fun of my big sis. Or what? They are both Dark World entities, so their age and awareness is kind of undefined. I really don't want to get into this conversation. All I will say is that technically Orange is a lot older than Ralsei, as she was also a part of the 7 flowers that made up the bouquet. So technically Orange is physically the same age as Flowery, at least roughly. Also, we would do well to remember that this game starts off by Susie threatening to rip our face off with her teeth. It also really looks like she's about to do it too. As far as bullying goes, Marigold the giant rat is pretty tame. Just to reiterate, they're both being childish. I just feel it's a little crazy how people are calling Ralsei a bully. My policy is that you should match someone's energy, and I feel like that is always fair. Anyway, so Susie has some alone time again, and we have another moment with Ralsei. They leave, and in an interesting turn of events, we see that we can close our eyes and think about Ralsei. This specific cutscene has the community talking a lot about who Ralsei is, and also who they will be in the future. This deserves so much attention, which we will be giving it right now. We open with Ralsei praying. Keep in mind, this is the first time we see them pray, although they do reference how prayer is a constant activity. Prayer is a big part of Deltarune's religion. It seems as though people of Hometown light candles and pray for a specific person. The prayers are most likely of good fortune or safety or general nice things like that. I should mention, I'm not a very religious person. I know I've talked extensively about Christianity in my videos in the past, but that was just from research. I think I may have prayed when I was younger, but it was never really something we did constantly. Prayer to me is the equivalent of asking your deity for something. This is literally what Ralsei is doing in this scene, so despite what prayer may mean to you, this is how it is being presented in-game. The reason why I even preface this is because I have a strong inclination that this scene, as well as the Deltarune narrative, will be a critique or even a deconstruction of the concept of religion. I just want you all to know that if you pray and ask your deity of choice for things, I'm not calling you dumb or saying that you shouldn't do it. It's just not something I believe in, and so I will be talking about how Ralsei's prayers are pointless. Okay, just to reiterate, I mean no ill will towards those who are religious. Ralsei is praying for the prophecy to change. He wants this, he practically begs for it, and much like before, I'd imagine he is getting no sign that it will. I feel as if he has prayed, both before and after Susie saw the prophecy last night, and it seems like nothing has changed since then. He is praying for mercy, another facet of the Deltarune religion. In a very easily missed line during Caddy's rave in Chapter 4, she mentions how being kind to other people is also a tenet of the Deltarune religion. Flowery haphazardly interrupts Ralsei's prayer, and it seems like he is taking a new approach this time around. Asgore is safely away from the general area, so it seems like he isn't so pushy or disregarding of Ralsei in this scene. I should say that the pessimist in me thinks that Flowery is just trying to smooth talk Susie and Ralsei respectively to work against Chris. He knows Chris and the player won't falter because, like many things, we are beholden to the narrative. If we want to continue the game, we will keep playing. Susie and Ralsei, for that matter, are different stories. Yes, you could argue that Flowery is technically trying to help Ralsei in this scene, although it is absolutely to meet his own goals. When Ralsei and Susie stop fighting, that means that Chris cannot fight either. Flowery is playing multiple hands, exploring multiple avenues, all with the goal of changing his own fate. He really is a smart character, one of Toby's best. Like I mentioned, Flowery has a way of reading people, and it seems like he has read Ralsei in a very particular way. Honestly, it's not too difficult to read them this way, it's just impressive that Flowery was able to do it so quickly. Flowery begins the conversation with his opening gambit, catering to Ralsei's pacifism. He isn't upset that Seth and Aqua let the Lightners out of jail, and it seems like Flowery never really gets angry in general. Not at Asgore or the other flowers. The only time he comes close is when he's about to lose his fight with Chris. Flowery's lack of anger gives him this visage of being in control of every situation. He doesn't falter, because he can't. If he really wants his dream to come true, he must cling to it like the last autumn leaf, all the way through winter if he has to. Flowery explains how Aqua and Seth making friends with the Lightners is a step closer to understanding each other. This opening is made to get on Ralsei's good side, but it could absolutely be seen as something he believes. Words from the wise: the only way to truly defeat your enemy is to make them your friend. I don't mean to paint Flowery as a super manipulative bad guy, he isn't. It can absolutely be a little bit of both. Genuine kindness given to complete your own goals. Ralsei is not convinced. They see right through Flowery and is almost counting on the knight showing up to decimate his plans. Unfortunately for him, he has no answer to this, so he changes the subject, redirecting the conversation back to Ralsei. It should be noted that Ralsei is absolutely correct here. There is no plan or strategy here that Seth can think of to stop the knight. Flowery is hoping that Asgore will be so enthralled with his affection that he would accept these strangers as his new family. This is very depressing, as the flowers do look up to and care for Asgore, but you can't really blame him for being so focused on the reality of things. Flowery cannot stop the knight, everyone knows this, but you know what? I think Flowery understood this too. It's not power or tactics that Flowery is fueled by, but hope. His banger track says as such. Hope is what is driving Flowery's actions, and it will push him to his end, on his own terms. There is a part of him that knows this cannot go on forever, but hope doesn't always take logic into account, now does it? The conversation shifts back to Ralsei, who is praying for the world to change. A fair question is asked: how much does prayer offer? I will say prayer seems ultra effective in combat, as that is the name of their healing spell. But here, the question is not something that Ralsei has the answer to. It is all they can do. Flowery contests this, instead insisting that Ralsei should focus that energy inwards, put that faith into their own actions rather than the powers that be. I have to say this. It feels so paradoxical to pray directly to a religion that has long since abandoned you to your fate. Ralsei's wishes are to change fate and the prophecy. The prophecy is a set part of the religion which he follows, so why would praying to that exact same religion bring you any change? The system they are indentured to is also the system which has fated them to lose. They are empowering the system that screwed them over in the first place. Ralsei has now become angry, projecting their lack of self-awareness onto Flowery. The circumstances of their plight is not what they want, but they have seemingly been made aware of the alternative. A threat is issued, and I wholeheartedly believe that Ralsei can back this up. In Ralsei's eyes, Flowery has let himself go. Of what, I'm not so sure. Due to Flowery's actions, it seems like the game could stop functioning as intended, and perhaps even break down completely. This is speculation. The real point to highlight is Ralsei's threat. The world of Deltarune follows a path laid by the rules which give it structure. Flowery has ignored those rules, which supposedly has made him stronger than any Darkener we have ever faced. This is all thanks to his understanding of the diegetic elements which this world possesses. Ralsei has just as, if not more, knowledge regarding the world, the powers that be, and the fate of every pixel on your screen. If anything, Ralsei has the potential to be even more powerful than Flowery, but even he accepts that this power is meaningless in the face of fate. It's a mental block, a reluctance that was drilled into Ralsei from the very beginning. Yes, Ralsei has been holding back, and if they weren't, a lot of combat encounters would have been made much easier, but that would defeat the purpose of the game. The role of the game would cease to function, making the world useless. Now, there is another interpretation which could honestly be more of what Ralsei is implying. This is a funny thing to say. I'll admit that right now. But Ralsei could be like Batman. Yeah, I know. Just roll with me, okay? In the majority of content that features the superhero known as Batman, he has a strict set of rules that he follows. Protect people, and if you can, bring the villain in alive so that justice can be carried out. It's a standard, a principle that Batman has applied to himself, which he has decided to hold himself to. In certain pieces of Batman literature where this rule is questioned, there is often reference to how, if he ever did allow himself to falter even once, he wouldn't be able to turn back. The rules are different, but the principles are the same. Be honest with yourself. If you had the abilities of someone like Flowery, where you had the real-life equivalent of maximum stats, would you use those powers wisely? If you did, could you trust yourself to not misuse those powers even once? If you bent the rules in your favor once, how tempted would you be to bend the rules again? That's what this is to Ralsei, a temptation, an alluring circumstance that may be beneficial in the short term, but in his own words, make everything worse in the long term. For example, Ralsei can be seen flying as far back as Chapter 3. He can do this seemingly effortlessly, yet he chooses to walk and climb with Chris and Susie. He has been intentionally limiting his range of movement just to be on the same level of the Lightners. He's been waiting patiently as the player solves every puzzle, and he has carried the burden of this world on his shoulder since his birth. Until today. Slowly, but surely, Ralsei has been moving differently, slipping up, solving puzzles by himself, and of course, the best part, which I am so looking forward to talking about, Ralsei can tell us no. If Ralsei ever let themselves go, they could burn Flowery away in an instant. The threat is made, but Flowery is not shaken. He brings up the fact that he's still here. Flowery doesn't even argue if this is true or not. He simply highlights that Ralsei has hesitated. We know why Ralsei wouldn't attack Flowery unless provoked, but he takes this as an opportunity to argue that Ralsei is already on his side. Just as there is a part of Flowery that understands that he cannot win and this cannot go on forever, there is also a part of Ralsei that wants him to. It's a fun thought. So fun it makes Ralsei smile. But no, it's impossible. No one can do the impossible.
Says the impossibility himself.
This line tells us two things. Flowery knows what Ralsei is, and Ralsei is also aware of what he is. And it's something that should not be possible. Damn, this line messes me up so much. I hate it. I kinda hate it. It's so cool, but I also hate it. Let's take a quick break and revisit the conversation which seems to permeate through every Deltarune Ralsei video. The topic of what Ralsei is. So, imaginary friend theory was not disproven, but it wasn't proven either. Ralsei's item is one of the big boy Deltarune mysteries. Toby Fox probably wasn't ready to give that up yet. No matter. So, taking everything new we learned about what the Dark Worlds are capable of and everything Ralsei can do as opposed to others, I think we are inching closer and closer to putting this mystery to bed. Saying this has always worked for a Deltarune YouTuber, by the way. Okay, I am going to argue that Ralsei is an imaginary friend today, but I'm also going to play with the idea that they may be something more. Let's rapid fire some old theories. Ralsei is Chris's knife. This is disproven by the ending cutscene where Ralsei is moving independently. Chris always carries their knife, so this theory is now debunked. Ralsei is the Red Horns. So there is a chance that this thing in Chapter 3 is the red horns, although there is no full confirmation, unless you consider the camera. In Chapter 3, you have this camera here. When you take a picture of a darkener, like say the Pippins here, they momentarily turn back into their light world object, being a simple dice block. However, when you use it on Ralsei, nothing happens. I feel like I've never mentioned this when arguing that Ralsei is not an object, but it's literally one of the best pieces of information we have on the subject. So like, what is my problem? So with this, we can assume that Ralsei is not an object. So what makes me believe specifically that Ralsei is an imaginary friend? That is where the Shadow Mantle holder comes into play. Eram is usually the name people associate with this character, and I'm going to be using that name, but to be honest, the name doesn't really matter. What does matter is how too damn similar they are to Ralsei. It's funny, if I wasn't absolutely sure that Susie was with Ralsei the entire time, while Chris was doing the sword route, I would have guessed that Ralsei and Eram were the exact same person. Let's go down the line here. They both have horns. Ralsei's are a bit shorter, but still. They have a similar mouth structure, and they both use fire magic. While we're on the topic of fire magic, Ralsei's fire spell that they use in Chapter 5 looks very similar to Eram's. Now, I'm not saying they are the same person, far from it. I have never held this opinion. However, I will say their similarities are undeniable. So what do we have here? By using logic and working backwards, we can discern that Ralsei and Eram are the same type of darkener. Knowing this, to find out what Ralsei is, we need to understand what Eram is. Which, funnily enough, is much more easy. During the Spamton Sweepstakes, a community event now almost forgotten by the community, there is this post which details a time where Noelle hallucinated that she saw the Ice-E pizza box wink at her. In response, December made a show of burning out the eyes of that pizza box. And the name of the song that plays during Eram's fight is called Burning Eyes. If you're wondering why I trailed off there for a second, it's because I realized something. So yeah, Eram most likely is the burnt pizza box that hates December, and also is a darkener that was made by something that was previously destroyed or damaged. The original ending to that theory is that Eram was Noelle's imaginary friend and Ralsei was Chris's imaginary friend. But now with the added context of Chapter 5, I wonder if I may have been too hasty. So this could simply be me losing confidence in myself, not the first time this has happened when talking about this game. I still believe imaginary friend theory pretty strongly. But the thing that Flowery said in this moment has me wondering, what if Chris burned their horns and that is what made Ralsei? I think this idea has some validity, which is why I decided to include it in the video. However, I don't necessarily think it's true. For starters, there just has to be a reason why Ralsei looks so much like Asriel. So, I've been racking my brain non-stop thinking about what Flowery said. The impossibility, the impossibility, the impossibility. Why does he call Ralsei that? Why? What is impossible that we know of? Not a lot, especially when you take the Dark Worlds into account. It's not impossible to make a flower into a man. It's not impossible for the world itself to change around you. It's not impossible to just ignore the game's rules and just be super good all the time. In the world of Deltarune, what is even impossible? Well, two things come to mind. Defying the prophecy and Chris Dreamer being a monster. These are two harsh impossibilities that encompass Deltarune. I still think imaginary friend theory has some weight, but it also feels very specific. Like, the only time imaginary friend is ever referenced is during that one cutscene with the mics. It's so specific that I fear I may be molding Ralsei into something they are not, and maybe the solution is much more simple. This has never been a good way to theory craft, and I absolutely understand if you disagree. But there's something in my gut that tells me that Ralsei is just a dream, an impossible dream. I still fundamentally believe that Ralsei has deep emotional connections to Chris. That is something we can say for sure, considering how much they love their brother. And considering just how much Ralsei is willing to do for Chris, I can't help but think that Ralsei feels in servitude to Chris in some way, far beyond just being a hero of the prophecy. A strong desire that Chris holds. Something ethereal, something that holds strong emotional attachment. It seems to me that the reason why Flowery became a Dark World entity is because Asgore put so much time and effort into keeping him alive. Love, care, compassion, these emotions were strong, so they were strong in Flowery. We know now that it's pretty much possible for anything to become either a Darkener or a Dark World entity. We have objects, we have plants, we have the remains of dead monsters. We also know that the Dark Worlds can have a profound effect on dreams themselves. The Shadow Crystals, they are lost dreams. What if Ralsei is simply Chris's dream? Their dream of belonging, maybe even their dream of getting December back. This theory has no solid evidence, and really it's sort of a derivative of imaginary friend theory. But I think it might be true. The impossibility, a darkener with no form, no object, no anchor, just a dream, an impossible dream, a desire to defy fate, to defy logic, to defy reality. For the sake of keeping things consistent, I still firmly support imaginary friend theory. This is being written roughly 2 weeks after the release of Chapter 5. I am planning on playing through the chapters again to get a fresh perspective on everything, so maybe this theory will develop more in the future. Until then, let's talk about something that is a little bit more obvious when it comes to Ralsei. So after that pretty large tangent, Flowery and Ralsei are still arguing with each other. And Flowery is about to insinuate something. He reassures Ralsei that no matter what, no matter how things between them turn out, the fun gang will save the world. Flowery then gives Ralsei a peace offering of sorts, vouchers for a fountain machine back in the cafe. He specifically draws attention to the one that is colored blue and pink. To further bring the point home, Flowery calls Ralsei Princess, just like he did Susie, and Ralsei can be identified using a whole new pronoun, which is, in my opinion, 99.9% confirmation. I only hold reservation because I prefer to treat these things the same as I would a real-life situation. It's Ralsei's business on whether or not they want to share this information. It's clear that they aren't afraid to wear dresses around their friends, so we really just be sitting here outside the closet waiting for them. Any day now. It would be amazing if the way we change the prophecy is if Ralsei denied their role entirely to the point where they were no longer the prince. Here's a detail that I absolutely love, but is very easy to miss because it's so subtle. You know how Chris can get multiple transformation costumes, like one may be perceived as more masculine, another one more feminine? Ralsei gets the exact same treatment in this chapter, sporting multiple lawyer outfits. I am so proud of them, dude, and I'm proud of who they're becoming. It's kind of a weird thing to say that I'm proud of them when they were sort of what inspired me to change myself. The resolution to this scene is pretty wholesome. If you give Ralsei the blue and pink, they will be overjoyed to know that Chris is thinking of them. If you don't, then Susie will step in, having also clocked that Ralsei wanted to try it. Now, I think it's time we discuss that new pronoun. For those who don't know, Deltarune has a title system. I understand it's a pretty big thing and it's been in the game from day one, but it is pretty easy to miss if you aren't checking the titles constantly. Throughout the game, the titles of a character can change. This is either due to actions or narrative beats. This system is mostly used for laughs. For example, if you find Moss in Chapter 2, Chris's title is upgraded to Moss Finder. Also, the system can give subtle information about how a person feels about the current situation. Following the confirmation that UI elements are diegetic, we can assume that these titles are a fundamental part of the world and the characters. These titles can now give us big indications of the inner natures of a person, and it wasn't until recently that I realized just how masculine Ralsei's titles were. Like every other Ralsei title up until this point, emphasized that he was a prince. All of his Chapter 1 titles call him a prince, all of Chapter 2 titles call him a prince. It's 100% indicative of Ralsei's desire to adhere to his role within the story. He is the prince, and he has accepted that. Almost all of Ralsei's titles emphasize and reinforce him as a boy in some way. This is why the change is so impactful. This is the first and only time the title system refers to Ralsei as their. And we know this is specific to Ralsei because Susie is also called Darkvine, but she has a completely different description. Even just the description is so powerful on top of that.
the dark vine watering their own thorns. Ralsei has been cultivating a more abrasive side this chapter, more assertive and more angry, as we've already discussed. It also implies a certain sense of confidence in one's own abilities that Ralsei is beginning to show. They start using their fire magic. They try to take out Flowery before he even gets a chance to fight the Lightners. Ralsei is becoming more and more like Flowery by the minute. Now, before we move on, I'd just like to clarify that Ralsei's first title can also be used as evidence for trans Ralsei. Artemisia goes well with tea. You may think this is just a reference to how Ralsei likes tea, but there's trans energy in this title too. The Artemisia is a type of plant from the genus Asteraceae. It's a daisy plant that comes in several different forms. Some of them have little white hairs on them, but also this plant species is known for several medicinal uses throughout history. However, where the real evidence comes in is its namesake. The name comes from the Greek goddess Artemis, the Greek goddess of hunting. And yes, I am well aware that I said goddess twice. So now, after we've talked about all of the evidence, I think we should talk about why this matters. One of Deltarune's core themes is choice, and the lack thereof. Your choices don't matter, all your theories are wrong, thank you for playing. The pursuit of freedom is a choice, but the feeling of not being comfortable with your body is not. They may choose to live with being uncomfortable to adhere to societal standards, but the feeling is primal, unavoidable. You cannot deny it. This is not something specific to Ralsei, many people go through this. The angle of nonconformity is clear and all fine, but I find the angle of being placed into a role you don't want, but thought you did is so much more emotionally satisfying. Some of you may have already taken notice that this resonates with me a little bit. The trans allegory of Ralsei being forced to embody this very masculine role since birth and to have that role be doomed to fail is very clear to me. Trans women are placed into masculine roles just the same and are sometimes forced to adhere to their masculine expectations, when obviously this doesn't fit them at all. It's a spectrum, obviously. Whether Ralsei commits to femme or takes on a more gender-fluid form is up in the air. I will say, the irony is not lost on me that the Darkner that could change form at will was super bound by a role that was associated with a specific gender. I talked about the Princess Ralsei scene before, but one little addendum I wanted to make in regards to it is how Ralsei perceives the idea of changing. In Ralsei's own words, they were a prince for a while but haven't been a princess yet. The only difference is how you present yourself. It's fun to try new things, as long as that's what other people want. This last bit is where I feel Ralsei messes up the lesson. If and when Ralsei decides to change their identity officially, it should be on their terms and something they are comfortable with, not something which the Lightners allowed them to do. The decision should not involve Chris whatsoever unless it's supportive action after the fact. Judging by Ralsei's actions and how much they wear that shit, I think it's pretty clear what Ralsei would want, and the deciding factor is if Ralsei decides to accept the freedom to make the choice themselves. So, after talking about why this matters to people in general, I want to talk about why this matters to me. So, if you didn't know, I am now going by he, they. This could change, I might drop the he altogether, or maybe it'll be this way forever. I made a separate video talking about this change, but I also realized that only a fraction of the people watching this video will watch the announcement video. That's just how YouTube works. So, just to set a few things straight, this decision wasn't made in the 2 weeks since Deltarune Chapter 5 released. Deltarune Chapter 5 was the last straw, if you will. I say it like it's a bad thing, but it's not. I'm locked in now. I'm changing, and I'm not changing back. I could get really personal and talk about my childhood and how my parents treated me and how masculine norms and expectations were drilled into me. But I don't think people want that. It might bring down the mood a bit. Or maybe I'm just scared to talk about it. I don't know. What I will talk about is how I now resonate with Ralsei so much more, considering the change that he went through in the new chapter. If you were to ask me what I was even just a month ago, I would have told you confidently, he, him. I'm a guy, I have always been a guy, and I was happy with that. I can almost guarantee you that Ralsei was also happy to be in his role early on in the story. His role was the Prince of Darkness, and he was happy being that. It's funny, I always assumed that Ralsei was just a little bit like me, a guy who was a little bit more in touch with his feminine side. Now listen, there's nothing wrong if that applies to you. I'm not saying you can't exist like that. I'm not. But after looking back on my life and noticing the patterns and things that I did when I was younger, I eventually came to the conclusion that I just wasn't content with just being he/him. It wasn't anger or sadness I felt, it was just dissatisfaction. I was no longer satisfied with being a guy, so I asked myself why. Why do I feel this way? For the longest time, I thought I was happy, and technically I was happy. But I learned that there's a difference between happiness that comes from conformity and happiness that comes from authenticity. While I am in no way trying to say that feminine men cannot be happy, I was not. Not entirely. Who knows, maybe I was jealous too. I'm still working through things myself, so don't take everything I say as 100%. I'm not sure how far I'm going to go with this. I want to try new things. I'm just looking for a nice sweet spot right now. Ralsei will follow their own path, and I am so eager to see where they will end up. I feel like being met with what they could be gave them a new perspective. They look so happy in that dress, dude. Ralsei means so much to me now. They helped me make the jump, or maybe it could be more accurate to say they convinced me to finally dip my toes in the water. Thank you, everyone. The community has been very supportive and wholesome, so thank you. Okay, let's move on. Asgore is getting restless. His desire to be at the fountain has completely overtaken him. Flowery is slowly but surely running out of time. Flowery has decided to keep Chris's secrets safe despite knowing that they made the fountain. Purely from a tactical point of view, this makes sense, as now that Chris has been told by Asgore to leave, this information would prompt Asgore to talk to Chris. The fun gang arrives to meet the 7 flowers. Flowery informs his botanical kin that they are here to destroy Asgore's dreams. A challenge is issued, and all of the flowers leave via flight, except for Seth, who decides to walk away. I have no idea if this means anything, I just want the world to know. Flowery seeks to make the Lightners falter, so he begins by attacking the sanctity of their bond. Flowery is obviously poking at the fact that Chris keeps so many secrets from their so-called friends. Ralsei, just as before, is not convinced. They have not come this far on a whim. Blue and Yellow are there to meet the gang first, dispatched after their attacks all miss. Flowery then attempts to guilt the Lightners with a pretty depressing story that contains truth. The flowers have always been just that, weak little plants that are confined to their chambers and therefore their roles. Only today have they ever known their own face, their own smiles. The dreams of these flowers are reliant on this dark world. This isn't like the other times. The flowers cannot be moved to the dark world of Castletown. They are delicate and need to be given extra care and attention. The chambers are keeping them confined, but they are also keeping the flowers alive. Unfortunately, it seems like the guilt is getting to Ralsei. He cares so much about the flowers' dreams, yet it doesn't change the fact that if this fountain is allowed to stay, the roaring draws closer. Flowery snaps back with an argument that is as relevant today as it was 5 years ago. Why is Ralsei's dark world so special? The better question is, why does this dark world not deserve to exist when Ralsei can just go home? There are factual reasons, being that the Castletown is made of pure darkness, and then the emotional reason being that Castletown is currently home to all of our friends. Despite all of these reasons, the circumstances are still unfair. It's not right, it's not fair, it's plain old us versus them. This fountain endangers the world by simply existing. However, Castletown endangers the world just the same. We can take all of the Darkners here back to Castletown, but you cannot say the same for Flowery and all of the other flowers.
The cold, bitter truth is really what I think is getting under Ralsei's skin. He doesn't want this. He doesn't want to crush the flower's dreams, yet here he is. This is pure pragmatism. He knows that this has to be done, not just for the sake of Chris and Susie, but for the sake of the world and everyone beside him. Flowery states that they should just seal Castletown, and Susie is enraged by this idea, especially considering she has recently started to live there. It is a one-on-one matchup, dream versus dream. The will of the better dreamer will determine who is the strongest. Later, when Flowery appears again, Ralsei is done talking. They sprint up the stairs, still refusing to fly, still clinging to the ground just like they cling to their role. They turn and strike, but Flowery's superior stats allow him to dodge. It's very clear to Ralsei that Flowery has no chance of winning. They know Chris's power, and while Flowery may be considered one of the toughest opponents they've ever faced, Flowery can never surpass a Lightner. Flowery chides Ralsei once more, claiming that he is a human, obviously expecting Ralsei to clap back with the correction. The flowers are not humans, they are flowers, they are simply pretending to be human, much like a Darkner is pretending to be a living being. This was all so he could point out that the flowers are no different than the Darkners which Ralsei defends and houses. Darkners could be seen as pretending to be alive while they are only inanimate objects. Susie would believe that they deserve to be treated as real regardless. This comparison is another example of Flowery pointing out the flaws in Ralsei's logic. They have no answer. Yet again, they fall back on what they know. Flowery is a flower, and Ralsei is a Darkner. That is all they can ever be. Ralsei is only doing what they can. These words to Flowery are more worthless than the compost which Asgore uses to fertilize his soil, which in all honesty would be pretty valuable to Flowery, but still. Flowery was trying to make Ralsei see his point of view, make them come to his side, but he failed. Ralsei is bound to his purpose, and thus the only thing that all of Flowery's acts have accomplished is feeding into his jealousy. Ralsei threatens Flowery once again, and like before, I believe them. They explain that the rules are paramount. If Ralsei stops following the rules, there will be no cohesion, no structure. They explain it like they are absolutely sure of the outcome. But it's all so vague. I wonder if it's just the fear talking. Unless Ralsei was specifically a part of the prophecy, or even a part of the Deltarune universe itself, I can't imagine they would know what would happen. The rage, the stress, the guilt, all unavoidable. Ralsei breaks. They don't want this. They don't want Flowery to have to die for their Castletown to live, yet here we are. So Flowery asks, what do they want? Ralsei can't answer this either. I think we know what they want, although I fear they are too afraid to take it. Further along, the fun gang finds themselves in a big room. Timing here must be very precise. If you fail this room 2 times, Susie offers a compromise. Why wait? Why let Chris have all the choice? In this room, Susie and Ralsei will move independently. You don't have to make all the decisions now. This is a connection, not through action, but trust. Susie has always been more than able to ignore and act on her own. Ralsei could too, even though it scared them. In this moment, things are different. With each member of the fun gang moving independently, this room becomes so much easier. Now, it seems like the idea of player choice being taken away is not necessarily a bad thing. Capping off this moment of teamwork, the fun gang finally makes it to the top. Ralsei is the closest to Susie as a shuriken is about to hit her. Now, this could just be me seeing things, but if I didn't know any better, I would say that while charging up their fire magic, Ralsei intentionally slowed down the game to give themselves more time to cast it. This could have all been just for dramatic effect, but the screen dims ever so slightly, very similar to when the act menu comes up. And if you remember, when the act menu comes up, time momentarily freezes. Whether or not Ralsei slowed down the game is besides the point. They have now openly used fire magic in front of Susie. In Undertale, fire magic was a staple of the Dreamers, and while I have no idea if that's meaningful here, I would like to once again point out that Ralsei's fire magic looks very similar to Eram's attacks in Chapter 3. Now, this could just be a generalization, like this is how the devs have decided to animate fire magic, and because the dev team is so small, all of the fire animation sprites look very similar. Regardless of the fire magic's significance to the Dreamers, this was a big moment for Ralsei. We already knew they could use fire magic from Chapter 4, but to see it so vibrantly was a great payoff for sure. I will also say it seems to do a lot of damage. Ralsei completely vaporizes that shuriken in an instant. It seems that fire attack can do a lot more damage than Chris. Oh, wait a minute. Chris can't even damage the shurikens in the first place. It's almost like those specific bullet patterns don't work like the others, and we've seen before that they cannot be damaged. Ralsei's fire magic appears to have the capability to remove things from the game entirely. And when I say remove, I mean completely vaporize. These shurikens cannot be damaged by the player. These are not supposed to be attacked, yet Ralsei was able to burn it away in an instant. I wonder if this is what they were talking about when they said that everything would fall apart. Like, for example, what would happen if Ralsei were to use their fire magic on a wall, or maybe even the soul itself? Could Ralsei's fire magic literally vaporize the game world itself? Questions that may just be answered if the player keeps screwing around and going out of bounds. Ralsei is changing, like the wind, like the seasons. This moment, admittedly, always gets me a little choked up, and I'm sort of glad that I didn't see this moment on stream. When I first saw this moment, I legitimately started to tear up a bit. It's probably not that deep in the grand scheme of things, but it's the most important Ralsei moment in my eyes. This moment is what follows after you defeat the secret boss and gather all of the pink coins. Ralsei does have some things to say during the fight with Pink, but I feel like that fight resonates so much more with Chris, so I will reserve to talking about the secret boss in Chris's video. After we defeat Pink, a new area opens. The flowers are here to meet us in their hidden place. A place which houses 6 different items that are associated with the flowers themselves. Returning items from Undertale, each of these items feel unique and powerful in their own way. You can only choose 3, but right after you choose 3, you get something very special. It seems as though there is one more person here who wants to help you. Flowery. Flowery, with his back to us, offers his scarf. Before he leaves, he pokes fun at Ralsei like he always has, stating that they are going to need this. Ralsei's journey up until this point has been one of discovery and conformity. Their purpose has defined who they are within their own eyes. The people around them think so highly of them and want nothing more than to see them succeed. See them be themselves. Ralsei stubbornly has clung to this mentality. Appeasement, relinquishment, acceptance. Everything about what Flowery is makes Ralsei upset. Flowery is but a child compared to what Ralsei is capable of. They have always allowed others to make decisions for them. The reason why Ralsei is so agreeable to us is because they are beholden to our status. They see Chris and the player as beings far above themselves, and as a result, Ralsei always believes that Chris will have more value than them. Ralsei is the person who tells you about the items. The ribbon which they can wear prompts a very adorable cutscene which I have always enjoyed. The equipment that the party uses has not always been fully under the player's control. Susie, for example, refused to give back anything if you decided to give her gear in Chapter 1. In certain circumstances, she still refuses to give gear back. And now we have this. The Flowery Scarf is Ralsei's ultimate weapon. It has insane stats and it would easily make them the strongest party member. It's a gift, a temptation. Flowery has always tried to get Ralsei to see his point of view and agree to start bending the rules in their own favor. This is just another example, but this time it works, in a way.
I'm not wearing this stupid ribbon.
Ralsei tells you no. Across Ralsei's entire journey, they have smiled, agreed, and accepted whatever happens to them. No matter how painful or inconvenient, they pushed on. And now, they defy us. They defy Chris. You cannot force them to wear it no matter what. It's beautiful. Yeah, I know it's petty. I know that this scarf is genuinely super good and Ralsei is being dumb for not wanting to use it. This is what Flowery wanted from the beginning. He knew Ralsei would never wear something like that, which is why he gave it to Chris. No matter what, Flowery got what he wanted. Ralsei told us no. He is exercising his freedom. They don't even realize it. They even make a stupid excuse. They say it doesn't fit them when the description clearly says it's the perfect size. They can absolutely wear this just like Susie could always wear ribbons. They just don't want to. I am so proud of them. They told us no. And we just have to accept that. The final Gerona is struck, and it's time to fight Flowery. During this battle, Ralsei will carry a brand new cadence. This scowl, this determined scowl will cover their face the entire battle. When downed, they no longer deflate into a pile of fluff. Now, when they defend, they stretch their scarf outward, looking to deflect any oncoming attack rather than endure it. Their anger has made them more determined than ever. What's interesting about this fight is that Flowery is not trying to kill you. If you lose, you are simply healed and reset. Despite how difficult the challenge is, the player presses on as usual, and Flowery is eventually defeated. Ralsei attempts to end the battle using the justice system used before, this time putting Flowery on trial. The make-believe has become even more prevalent. Both use the game systems to argue how one is guilty, and then when it looks like the party is about to lose, Ralsei takes all of the blame for themselves. Flowery actually compliments this action because he knows it's not true. Ralsei lied so that the petals would only remove them from the fight instead of the Lightners. Potential foreshadowing aside, it's time for another installment of Susie's idea.
With your powers combined, Omega Flowery!
The battle is over. Asgore arrives, Blue heals everyone, and we get the most cryptic-ass lore dump imaginable. But the story is not over just yet. Right after Chris seals the fountain, the knight pretty much frame perfect creates another one at the exact same time that this one is closed. Didn't even know that was possible, but sure. The knight quickly swoons in and takes Asgore. Naturally, Flowery gives chase and proceeds to do potentially one of the most intelligent things a character has done so far. Flowery knows that the knight is quick and can probably get away, so he brings a few Floridin with him. Not to help him fight, but to bend the game's rules in his favor like he always has. Touching the Floridin brings himself and Floridin and the knight into a battle to keep the knight in one place. He then proceeds to use his insane maxed out stats to deal all of the damage. Flowery was most certainly holding back against us, but it was all for nothing.
You can ignore my fake statistics. Heh. Who needs stats anyway? I've got a bouquet of moves where that came from. Seems like you still don't get it. Nothing is stronger than Flower's dream.
I cannot stress enough the importance of understanding what just happened here. This battle between these two incredibly powerful beings is a clear example that the Dark Worlds run on make-believe logic. Flowery did an insane amount of damage to the knight, and in response the knight used its own imagination to turn all of the 9s into 0s, nullifying the damage entirely. Flowery realizes this and tries to overpower the knight once again. Unfortunately, like I already stated, Flowery can never overpower a Lightner. It seems that the knight is so engorged with deterministic power that they can counteract any and all of the game's systems used against them. This is more support for the knight being an embodiment of the game's narrative itself, a physical representation of the plot, if you will. But that is a topic for a later date. I do feel like if we are ever to defeat the knight in the future, we cannot do so using the game's systems. unless the way we seek to do it is very, very creative. The only way I see us overpowering the Knight in the future is if we do it with sheer force of will, and the will of our Lightners are stronger. Flowery has been cut in half. Before, when Ralsei attacked Flowery, they missed completely. They know this, and they still rush over to try and heal him. The healing prayer fails, just like every other time. The damage the Knight did was directly to the flower itself. The Dark World can do nothing. Ralsei's Dark World magic can do nothing. There is no escape for old Flowery. In his final moments, he takes the time to reconcile. Like he had done in the past, he tries to entrust knowledge to the Lightners. There is something beneath the town, beyond their comprehension, something evil, something dark, something primal. He also takes the time to entrust Chris and Susie with his blessing. He believes that even if he falls on this day, the two will find a way to win. He even takes the time to accommodate Ralsei. In another life, they could have been friends. After Flowery fades away, there is no more words. The fountain is sealed, and they are back to reality. For now, the story is over. What was once Deltarune today is now Deltarune tomorrow once again. Ralsei has changed. If you had the flowery scarf before, it now becomes the broken scarf. A fraction of its power remains, but Ralsei will wear it now. This tiny bit of information tells us about Flowery's nature, but that is a story for later. I don't know if it's just recency bias, or maybe I'm just getting hyped because of the new Deltarune content, but I was thoroughly satisfied by Ralsei's development. Susie has been my default favorite character for a while, mostly because I find it damn near impossible to choose between these three. But I think I might just make Ralsei my new favorite. His story in particular was always intriguing to me. Toby put the work in and gave us a new side of a character we fell in love with all the way back in 2018. Damn. It's crazy how it's almost been 10 years, isn't it? Ralsei was placed inside a box, and what was probably the worst part is they enjoyed the box for a while. They assumed that this is how life works and they should just accept it. Being met with an extreme of the life they were always curious about, they realized that this stagnation would never meet their goals. Ralsei, even now, doesn't wish to be like Flowery, but they know that something has to give. If their dream of changing fate and saving their friends will ever be realized, they must change themselves. Be the change they want to see in the world. It's okay, Ralsei. Your friends will trust you not to let yourself go completely. You can trust yourself. Ralsei, stop holding back. Ralsei inspired me to change. And while I don't know if Ralsei and I will find ourselves at the same place by our journey's end, I cannot wait to see what they are capable of. Thank you all so much for watching. Goodbye. If you would like to directly support me and everything I'm doing on the channel, please consider becoming a member today. And thank you to all the current members. Thank you, Lilico. Thank you, Bleed4MBG. Thank you, Vantum. Thank you, Kiriyami. Thank you, Avast Antivirus. Thank you, Savvy Sillybug. Thank you, Gaston Zumbo. Thank you, Flubai. Thank you, Heboi. Thank you, Mine. Thank you, Iceberger. Thank you, J-Dog the Jester. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Lumen Scented. Thank you, Gussie. Thank you, Calypso Love. Thank you, Jade. Thank you, Tamak. Thank you, Ada's Outside. Thank you, Iru Pop. Thank you, Norkbork. Thank you, Unfolding Space. Thank you, Luna Asashiho. Thank you, Angry Freddy. Thank you, Pab Gamer. Thank you, Mitstifer. Thank you, LJ Afton. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Dr. Dirty Legs. Thank you, Juan. Thank you all so much. Your support is greatly appreciated.